This little girl has just been born. While she was still in her mother's womb, she survived an Israeli airstrike. But her mother, Shema Kanan, didn't. She died from her injuries. The doctors carried out an emergency caesarean section and saved the baby.
I think what's happened is a miracle because the mother is dead about 10 minutes. As known, if the mother is dying or is dead for the time more than 5 minutes, usually the babies are dying.
The doctors say that this little girl is still in a very critical condition. But if she can get through one day, her chances of surviving should be much better. The two-storey house was struck in the middle of the night. There were 4 families in it and 5 children. Everyone was injured. The family has a new baby. It should be a time of celebration. But it's war and they're grieving. They say Israel gave no warning before it destroyed the house.
In my cousin's case, they hit the 2 muscles in a few seconds. So they didn't have any time to run away.
Maha Sheikh Ali was in the house when the attack happened.
The baby is a gift. She's the first granddaughter. Neither Shama or we will live in peace while the Israeli invasion is there.
Despite all the grief, the family has now given her a name. Shema, the same as her mother. Nicole Johnston, Al Jazeera, Deir el-Bella.
Well, meanwhile, at least 5 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank in protests against Israel's offensive in Gaza. This was the scene at a hospital in Hebron. 2 other Palestinians were killed in overnight protests when around 10,000 people marched through the West Bank. Imtiaz Tayyab is in Ramallah, joins us now live from there. Imtiaz, these clashes that we've been seeing today, 5 people dead today alone. Who's clashing with whom?
Yes, a very volatile and frankly deadly situation here in the occupied West Bank. What I can tell you is that shortly after Friday prayers, a group of Palestinians began protesting in the town of Hawara, which is just south of the city of Nablus. Now, what we understand is that an Israeli settler in a car drove past that protest and opened fire. Now, what we know is that an 18-year-old was killed in that shooting and 3 others were injured. Now, shortly afterwards, Israeli security forces appeared on the scene, began to clash with protesters, resulting in the death of another Palestinian protester, a 22-year-old. Now, in Hebron, in an area just north of the city known as Beit Umar, we understand that 3 Palestinian protesters were killed when they clashed with Israeli security forces. Now, these protests are, of course, in response to the 18-day Israeli assault of Gaza. It, of course, attracted thousands of people to the streets here in Ramallah, just on the outskirts of the city, at the Kalandia checkpoint, which separates Jerusalem and indeed Ramallah. That was a huge protest, probably the largest we've seen since the Israeli offensive, perhaps the largest we've seen in years. Now, we were caught in the middle of that protest. Here's our report.
The violence was expected, but no one predicted the scale of it. This is the largest protest the occupied West Bank has seen in years. For hours, protesters clashed with Israeli forces outside the Kalandia checkpoint. They threw stones, fireworks, and Molotov cocktails. In retaliation, Israeli military forces fired tear gas canisters and rubber-coated steel bullets. Despite being better equipped, it was clear that at times the soldiers were struggling to contain the situation, making protesters even more determined.
These people who've come to the streets, taken to the streets to protest the ongoing siege of Gaza, the violence there, they're angry, they want it to stop, and they want the end of Israeli aggression.
At one point, live fire erupted. Both sides claimed the other shot first. A bullet hole clearly visible in the windshield of a satellite truck parked less than a meter from where we were broadcasting. Among the dead, dozens were also injured in the clashes, but protesters said they were unafraid.
For 18 days, the people of Gaza have been killed. We should have started protesting from the very first day to end this aggression.
We are here to stand with our people in Gaza. Today is the beginning of a new intifada in the occupied Palestinian territories against the occupier and his aggression towards Gaza.
Violence also erupted in Bethlehem and, in these images, occupied East Jerusalem. Israeli police confronted Palestinian protesters in and around the old walled city, including near a holy site revered by both Muslims and Jews. Officials say they arrested around 20 people. Since Israel's latest offensive in Gaza began, many have asked why people living in the occupied West Bank have been relatively silent about the suffering. On Thursday evening, they spoke loudly and angrily against it, and many expect Friday to bring even larger and louder protests.